Another coffee with Casey. I'm really excited to have William Glass over here. William, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to quickly give a short introduction, and we'll just get into our conversation. So, folks, William Glass is the co-founder and CEO of Ostrich. He's wearing the T-shirt right there as well. Yep, there we go. Um, and we'll talk about what Ostrich is and all that in just a bit. He's involved in Mind Over Matters e-commerce site. He's a strategy and digital consultant for many businesses, and he's the host of a very active Silicon Alley podcast as well. Will and I go back a long, long ways. We were in the same fraternity in college. We overlapped 3 years, and so since Will has actually been done a lot of stuff as well. Primarily, something that I want to highlight for y'all is that Will was a Fulbright scholar in Thailand, and I'm going to butcher this name, I'm sure, but in Konkan, where you spent a year, and since then Will has been a business development in business development roles in Gartner and Ramesh before starting his own venture. And so, welcome, Will. And you and I talk almost on a weekly basis. With you, we can discuss a dozen different platforms, a dozen different topics on best practices, from YouTube to Facebook to email and whatnot. But for the first conversation in this series, I want to focus on the big picture, so that we can start that conversation slowly, and then we can pick and choose for the next video or so. So, Will, over to you. I want you to tell us your journey, where you started, how you've come all the way, and tell us some of the things you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, Saudi Cup. Sabaydi Mai. Hope you guys are doing well. Majak America. Bin Kon Isan. So I lived in Konkan, so I will say that my Thai is not good, but chop ohan Thai, chop pet mak mak, all that good stuff. But thanks, Casey, for having me, and I'm excited. Actually, Chula Longkorn, I spent the first month there when I was in Thailand, when I was in Bangkok. So it's got a special place in my heart, and I'm excited to be speaking with you guys. So, yeah, Casey, thanks for having me. So my background, Casey and I went to college together, Rollins College in Orlando, Florida, and I studied international relations. And the only thing that I knew that I wanted to do when I graduated college was live abroad for a year and prove that if things hit the fan in the United States, and I, for whatever reason, had to go overseas, that I could hack it and survive. And I was lucky enough to go to Thailand, which is one of the best places I've ever been, and had an incredible experience there. And I taught English. So while I was there, I taught English in Konkan to 13 to middle school through high school, so 13 to 19-year-olds, and was in near Konkan. Wasn't actually in the city, so in the middle of the countryside. So I got to experience all parts of Thailand, being in Bangkok as well as in Isan. When I came back, I've always been really interested in personal finance and wanted to come back and make some money, because while I was in Thailand, I didn't really make anything. It was more just a living stipend, and I ended up in software sales. So worked at a company called Gartner Research. They're in the S&P 500. And they're just this really large technology research company that advises Fortune 500 companies on which software products to buy. Because when you get into enterprise software, it gets way more complicated than the stuff that you see on the consumer side. And specifically within Gartner, I was working with startups and helping them sell to the enterprise. So these were companies that had products that they wanted to sell to a Coca-Cola, a Walmart, ExxonMobil, like these types of companies. And so I got a really good taste of what entrepreneurship is really like, working with the leadership executives of these companies that range from pre-revenue all the way up to $250 million in annual revenue. So I got to see a broad range of where companies were in their life cycle and what you needed to do in order to be successful. I ended up working got poached to work for a client in New York City called Remesh. Also in the kind of market research space. They had an artificial intelligence tool, and learned the scaling up from zero. The whole time I've been, like I said, really interested in personal finance. My parents got divorced because of money. We don't really talk about finance. It's kind of taboo. Similar in Thailand, I assume from my experience. It's just one of those things that we don't talk about, but there's real world consequences for not talking about financial goals and financial literacy and helping people. And so that's kind of been something that I've always just been personally interested in, and started investing in stocks at a young age, and bought a rental property in Florida and all kinds of things like that. And so throughout my time when I was at Gartner, I started developing kind of this philosophy of what was wrong with the financial system. Why aren't people seeing success? And that slowly went from just kind of this concept into a business. And I connected with another friend from college when I moved up to New York, who was in finance, worked in investment banking, and wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. Didn't really like the lifestyle, and so we came together to found Ostrich. And the whole concept is to gamify financial success and help people actually achieve their financial goals using the best from behavioral economics, social accountability, and applying that to money. So you can think of saving with friends, investing with friends, giving with friends, growing and hitting goals together.
And your app is super cool. I have it on my phone right here as well. Well, let's tell our folks a little bit more about what the app does, where they can find it, how they can download it, where in the development phase you are in at right now as well. Let's get some users as well in that process, and I think it's a win-win for everyone because it's going to help everybody. So tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're about 2 years into building the product. The first year was really just learning and trying things. We tested out using Facebook groups. We essentially, did focus groups, did surveys to just sort of understand what were the problems that people were having, and how could we solve them in a way that other people out there weren't already solving. So thinking about the personal finance space, it's super crowded. There's so many apps, at least in the United States. I'm not sure how crowded it is in Thailand, but in the US, it's super crowded. So that was really what we did for the first year. And at this point, we have a version that's live in the App Store. I am not a coder. I don't know how to write code, but built this version using a combination of no code and low code tools. And if you're not familiar with no code and low code tools, they're similar to like a Wix or a Squarespace or some of these other like website builders where you can drag and drop components. And so I used a tool called AppGyver, and it's free as long as you don't do 2 million, 10 million in revenue, which I don't know any startup that starts at 10 million in revenue. So it's really caters to sort of like indie developers. But it gave us the flexibility to build this product, and it's live on iOS and Android, the app. And what it allowed us to do was then bring on an actual engineer who's building a native version that has some of the capabilities that the current version doesn't have. So we're set to launch that and move into a testing phase probably in the next month or so, and then we'll be rolling that out, and it has a more robust social experience. But to date, we have not raised any capital. This has all been bootstrapped. So I did well in sales and saved a lot of money, and have other investments that help keep me afloat. But that's something that's on our roadmap when we get to the point where it makes sense and we have the use of capital. So that's kind of where we are at this stage. Haven't raised any money. We've got the first version out. We're at about 300 users currently. And with this next version, we'll actually do kind of a marketing push. We really haven't done too much marketing. We've got our social media channels and put some different things out content wise, but still sort of finding what the voice is. And with this new version, we've got a whole brand revamp that we're going to be doing with it.
Yeah.
So
and then let's drop some link or some QR codes up on the screen right now so that people can take a look at it as well. We'll do that post. But you say that very humbly, Will. You say that sure, for Ostrich you might have a decent, a humble user base at this point, but you've been in this sphere as this personal finance go-to person for a while. Your financialglass.com has been around for a while, and you've been posting content for a while. Well, I want to take our conversation a little bit forward and talk about the personal branding side. So this is an outcome. Oster is an outcome of your personal brand, or that's at least the way I see it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you created this wholesome, standout personal brand, and you've amassed hundreds of thousands of views across multiple platforms, and even now command a strong social media following. And I have students in my class who are interested in personal branding as well, but also could learn so much about your journey on how you did this, right? So the question there being, how did your personal brand story start? And what tools have you used to get where you are? And in the process, if you can identify that personal brand, that'd be amazing too. I know that's a loaded question, but let's talk a little bit about your personal brand.
Yeah, I guess one note on personal brand, and I'm taking this from a guest that I had on the podcast a little while back, but if you're interested in personal branding, there's a couple ways to think about it. There's one way to decide if you should build a personal brand. One is if you're going to build one business and that's it, you don't need a personal brand. The business is the brand, and that's what you follow it. If you plan on building multiple businesses, or you want to, essentially leverage that, maybe you're just interested, you like having attention and having your face and being recognized, then a personal brand might make sense. So if you plan on having multiple businesses, multiple ventures, a personal brand, you can then own that kind of who you are and then launch businesses off of that. That I only came across recently, but I can say that it is definitely true, because building any social media following is really tough. And I will say building a company brand, I think, is even harder, because it doesn't have a face. It doesn't have that connection. We as people love to connect with individuals. And I think for me, I just try to be myself. The times when I've tried not to enforce, here's what other people are doing in the space, I've gotten burned out. It's been bad content. People don't engage with it because it's not authentic. So I'd say that the best thing that you can do is be authentic. So like what you see on social media, for the most part, is who I am. I think for me, like, integrity and keeping your word is really important. So I think I try to do that on social media, and I try to only represent the things that are accurate. I'm not going to go post a picture on someone else's Lamborghini and say that I have one, because I don't. I'm going to be honest about that kind of stuff. And I think that's the key, is that you've just got to be authentically yourself when you're building a personal brand. And the places where I've had a lot of success, which are primarily on Facebook and LinkedIn. So that's where, like, the joy of, from a following perspective, I sit, is that with LinkedIn, I was genuinely trying to connect with people. It was, hey, like, we're in the same space, and you come with a very important tailored message. It's not a transaction, right? It's a relationship. And when you think about building a following based on relationships versus a transaction, I think that one creates more meaningful connection with your followers, and the numbers become less important because you have a strong community. So that's kind of, I guess, how I think about personal brand. And I guess if I was going to try to say what my personal brand is, I would say that it's positive. It's related to finance. It's related to working out, and I think a little bit of fun, hopefully. But I'd say overall, like, it's just trying to put out positivity.
Understood. And so let's hone in on this one component a little bit more, the financial sector, because from at least my perspective, that's the part I'm seeing. I just had another thought occur, so I'm gonna geek out a little bit here. What you said earlier about being authentic, right? And so folks in my class will understand this part as well. When creating content, you want to follow the EAT framework, right? Expertise, authority, and trust. You can be authentic on things you already are an expert on, and the trust is what is emphasized upon a bit more when you are authentic, right? And that authority comes from that expertise as well. So it's interrelated, but I see that a little bit in what you were saying as well: the expertise, authority, trust, and hopefully the students can resonate with this later on as well. Now let's going back to that financial side, right? So we see you as a personal finance guru, to put it like just straight out there. Now tell me, there's so much going on, and my students were in the digital marketing side, but the digital finance side growing at such a crazy pace, a pace right now. I would love for our conversation to focus on that a little bit as well. And with that said, we see a lot with what's going on with the decentralized finance or DeFi movement, we call it, right? What are some of the trends that you see? What are some of the trends that we should be aware of? And what could we do to capitalize?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. There's So I'm still, because there's so much that's happening in the DeFi space, the decentralized finance space, that it's changing all the time. There's a couple different Discord groups that you can go look at if you're interested in like getting deep into the weeds. But I think that right now I would proceed with caution. There are some really legitimate projects that are coming out, but you see, I don't remember which one it was, but Mark Cuban just lost his entire investment in a DeFi project that went from, you know, having a lot of success to zero in under 24 hours, right? And this is Mark Cuban, who, if you're not familiar, he's on Shark Tank. He's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. He, billionaire, investor, personality in the United States, who's pretty active in this space and talks about this stuff and is a very smart guy. And if he doesn't know it himself, he can find out the information because he's got, the resources. And this is someone that made a mistake, right? So I think that you've got to be very careful. But there are some really cool, legitimate projects that are going on. And the way that I've been thinking about this is that there's essentially solutions out there that are trying to recreate current apps that people use and just make them decentralized. And those projects have a specific use case and inherent value, because if you are a part of that community, then you actually get the kickback instead of it going to the company. Part of it goes to the project to continue to fund it so that it can continue to develop. But those applications have the potential to do really well. The cryptocurrencies that are out there, the new coins that are created that are just trying to take on Bitcoin and Ethereum, I would be a lot more hesitant to look into, just simply because it's probably a money grab for the creators for the most part, but you really need to focus on the coins with use cases, despite the fact that you hear, Doge has now gone from a joke to, being a legitimate player, but because it's gone to that stage, people are now starting to accept it as an actual form of payment. So there are use cases. So not to say that it can't come that way, but I would say that do a lot more listening and also be very critical of who you're listening to, because most of the people are either going to be super anti or super pro. And it's going to be really hard to find the people in the middle that are like, well, here are the pros and here are the cons. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't have anything specific, Casey, in terms of the next big thing.
Next big thing.
But
how awesome would that be?
Yeah. But I would say just, be smart, be careful. I think that's one of the get rich quick things is something that we like inherently lean into, because who doesn't want to be the person that, saw 4,000% return and on $20 or, 200 baht, and now they're, whatever, billionaires or whatever it is. But the reality is that that's not the norm, and you're more likely to have your money taken or get scammed out of it. And people don't talk about when that happens.
Yeah.
So I'd just be cautious, but there are some legitimate projects that are worth looking into.
And so now from the decentralized finance more towards the digital marketing and the digital sphere, I ask this because you serve as a consultant for different businesses, and you are helping run an e-commerce site by yourself as well. I want to understand, since you started to now, what are some of the changes that has been exciting you or frightening you in the digital sphere and from the marketing angle?
Yeah, I think from a marketing perspective, this isn't uncommon, but there's a lot of fake traffic, fake followers, fake just numbers. Like being in the consulting space, I've seen people lose a lot of them because all of a sudden they get a spike in views, but it's the person they hired is using bot traffic or using these like third-party sites that YouTube and Google look down on, where it's like follow sites or views. Everyone clicks on each other's videos, and you post yours and then you watch 100 of others, but people aren't actually watching them. They're clicking on them, clicking off, and these algorithms are smart enough to figure that out, and it'll actually damage you so in the long run. So I think being very, very careful of falling into the vanity metrics and being really focused on like what drives revenue. So for like Mind Over Matter, which is the drop shipping t-shirt design that Casey's referenced, that is like focused on teachers and different products, and it's used print on demand is what we use. So yeah, there's a bunch of different sites that you can use to do print on demand, but print on demand allows you to create your own designs and kind of custom products, but you don't ever hold any inventory. So essentially you handle just the design creation, the marketing, and the customer service. And so when an order comes through, the software directs it to the right print provider that you've already selected. You've already done the pricing yourself, and they print it, ship it, and it goes to the customer, and that's it. And you don't handle anything except for if there's a delay or an issue or something like that. And I think one of the things that's interesting is we use Etsy a lot, and Etsy is kind of like a creative mom and pop type of platform. So people go there looking for like very specific, unique projects that are products that are just tailored to specific interests, but mostly done by small business owners, individual creators. And they have a ton of different metrics that we see as a seller. But there's one metric that matters the most when I look at advertising spending on their platform, and it's return on ad spend. It literally just says, based on this product, here's how much you've spent versus how much you actually bring in. So anything over, there's some products that'll bring in, 20x. So, a dollar to advertise will bring in $20 in revenue. And then there's others which will get a ton of views and traffics and clicks, but the products won't convert. So our ad spend, our return on advertising spend will be like 0.2. So we're actually spending way more money to get very less in revenue. And so it's like playing with those triggers. There's certain metrics that you need to play around with. And I think that's the key when you think about like this space and digital marketing, is focusing on the metrics that matter, because there's now so many metrics and analytics that you can track, but views don't necessarily convert. Like the right people coming to your site, the right type of ad spend, that's what's really important. So I think that would be the thing that I would stress to your students, is thinking about like, what are the metrics that actually lead to revenue, or the key KPIs that are important to the business.
And I'm gonna use this as a moment to geek out a little bit for my students as well, where first there are a lot of metrics we can track, from your views to click-through rates to actual sales and conversions to how much time people spend on that page and this and that. There's so much we can look at, but some of those metrics are key to your success, right? And those we identify as KPIs. And I believe with each and every campaign, the first thing you should do is set your objective on what you are trying to achieve, identify that KPI, and don't lose sight of that. Because like you said, right, how awesome would it be to see millions of views on a product or millions of click-throughs on that is something that is exciting for someone that is selling or some content that you're creating. But if there is no follow through, if there is very little conversion, then it's just an excitement that doesn't result in an actual purchase. And so keeping your sight on the actual metric that you're trying to hit, that is so important. And the others, I mean, you can put that as a sub-objective here and there, and that's great to get you visibility. Perhaps that could result in a future sale in a later date. But what matters is at this point, especially in a startup phase, is to stay afloat for this current situation, right? And so that is so important. And I'm glad you brought that up as well. If you don't mind, I'm going to track back a little bit and
Sure.
talk about those black hat strategies you mentioned earlier, where a consultant that is hired by a client, the client wants the video to get certain views, the client wants the page to get certain follows, and there are black hat techniques for it, where you can literally buy followers, you can buy those views and whatnot. And you said it so well. That's not actual views, that's not actual followers, and eventually that spike will not be converting into engagements. And you and I, we both know multiple different people that have thousands and thousands of followers on Instagram, but then have an engagement rate of like 0.5%, 1%, which is not ideal. And so that's something we really do want to be careful about as well. And then one other thing I want to geek out with you is on the
Mhm.
SEO side, and I'm sure we can do a session on this later on as well. But on the SEO side, um, especially for Silicon Alley podcast, and I don't know if we're using backlinks there, but it fills that void, right? So the way I'm trying to kind of bring all this together is for Silicon Alley podcast, you have so many different people from so many different spheres come into your podcast as a guest. What number are we on the podcast right now? What episode are we at?
Gosh, what are we on? 90 something, I think. I think we're getting close to episode 100. So,
And that's
yeah.
amazing, right? 100 different notable people coming to your site as guests. That's amazing. Now, flipping that around for a website or for a business to get some organic traffic, backlinks are so important. And for backlinks, partnerships are very important. And although for Silicon Valley Podcast, I don't know if you've kind of monetized or not monetized, but capitalized on that backlink just yet, but you have that partnership already, which could easily form those backlinks. So I want to ask you this: how do you start to form those partnerships? Like, how did you go from saying, "Hey, I'm going to start a podcast with this series," to getting 90 different people to come to your show? Like, how does that partnership work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think on the backlink front, you're absolutely right, and that's one of the key strategies if you're trying to build up a backlink is go do podcasts because pretty much every single podcast will link to your website at some point, right? Link back to you. So it's a strategy if you're trying to build your own backlinks. But then in reverse, I tell every guest that if you've got a website, put it on the press page, right? Show that you were on this and put a backlink to it and share on social media. Because if someone's willing to go on a podcast, they have a reason, right? They're probably trying to promote a new book, a business, a product. They want to share their expertise because they want to be a speaker or a mentor. So it's I would actually say that it's sometimes more challenging to find high quality guests that and like weed through the noise than it is to yeah. And I think I'd say that's the hardest part than getting interest. There are different websites that you can go to, and your students can go to this as well. But there's one called Matchmaker and another one called Podmatch. And these are sites where you can, if you've got a podcast, you can list it and people can apply. Or if you want to be a guest, you can create a guest profile and you can see those podcasts and you can apply. So it's a two-way, you can search and find other people. And I found some really, really awesome folks through that strategy. I've also found some really bad ones. I have recorded episodes that I have not aired because I couldn't do it. Like it was just like the guest was just not good, and I didn't want it to be associated with my brand. So you do have to make some decisions. But yeah, I think from a connection perspective, when you get really focused on what your podcast is about, and you ask other guests that have been on, or you look on your network, you look on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find those people, and with the right outreach, be able to bring them in. And that's what I've had a lot of success with. Is I'll meet someone interesting, and just say, "Hey, would you be interested in being on the podcast and talking about X, Y, and Z and your expertise?" Um, but I think it's also figuring out like what your podcast is about is really important. I've got a friend that created one that was called Modern Romance, and it was all about like dating in New York City. And so like she was bringing in guests that were focused on like I don't know, therapists that did couples therapy, on owners of dating apps, and like just bringing in different stories or people that met during the pandemic and like how they managed to date during lockdown. um, so I think finding those interesting things, and then what I do is just try to give back. So if I will recommend people to other podcasts and vice versa if you're a good guest, because good guests are unfortunately not, they're sometimes hard to come by, sorting again through the noise of the quality folks versus the not quality. So I don't know if I answered your question, Casey,
No, you
but
did. And so I'm gonna geek out again, right? So the three things that the themes that I'm seeing is one, There are versions, I'm sure there are versions of the podcast matchmakers in other spheres as well. So if you need that connection,
Yeah.
put source for that backlink, just reaching out to those potential, networking opportunities is one. The second thing that I just got from that is, even though you do that, quality control is super important. So I'm sure your quality control right now is really good, that you're watching or viewing or hearing the podcast and seeing like, this is not up to par, so I'm not going to air this. That's great. But if you can do quality control even before that, then you just saved an hour, 2 hours of your time, of course. So quality control is important. And the third and the most important thing about creating a backlink, also doing partnerships slash collaboration, is that kickback. And the kickback doesn't have to be money, right? So that reciprocity angle is what really gets that backlink, as in you're showcasing someone, that someone's showcasing you, and finding the people that want to be showcased, and you as an entity finding places where they will showcase you as well. That reciprocity angle, I think, is another really, really big element as well. And so, Will,
Exactly.
it's been an absolutely awesome, 30 plus minutes, and I would love to talk some more about this, but we have to keep our content short enough so that it's easily consumable. And with on that note, Will, let's talk about things that we can talk about, as in, the students will watch this, and I'm hoping they will use either the comment section on the YouTube, or ideally on our discussion in class as well. What are some of the things we could talk about? I'm sure we could talk a little bit more about SEO.
Yeah,
Um,
we could talk about SEO. Obviously, like, if anyone's interested in podcast stuff, can definitely get deeper on that front.
we can do that.
Can go into the more deeper into the low code, no code, if people are interested in like venture capital and all that stuff. Like we turned down $60,000 investment early on with Ostrich and have chosen not to, and are figuring out how to fund the business through business partnership. So happy to like dive deep into all of the stuff that goes into creating a technology product. Drop shipping can get into that.
We could do
Uh,
email marketing also a little bit, I'm sure. YouTube marketing a little bit also. I know we've talked about the YouTube analytics and the things that you're seeing. We can talk about those analytics sides as well. And the one thing that you mentioned, uh, just now, with the low code, no code, the students, they just made their website on Weebly. And so it's
okay.
literally a low code, no code kind of solution to creating a website. So AppGiver is another thing that we could probably get deep into. Students, so these are just some of the things that we can talk about, either through the comment below, or just with a message to me or Will. Let's talk a little bit more on what more content we can create for them. It's so easy, just an
Yeah.
organic conversation, so we can just jump on a talk like this and then do some more of this. Well, it's such a pleasure having you. I'm sure this is not the end of our collab on this series. Thank you for being
I
on
hope
Coffee
not.
with Thank you for being on Coffee with Casey, man.
Thank
And
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me. And if you want, feel free to drop my LinkedIn down in the bottom. And if you guys want to request me, just actually type in like a message so that I know, like, hey, I'm part of Dr. Casey's class. Would love to connect on LinkedIn, but I'm happy to connect with any students on that format as well. So
Brilliant, awesome. Thank you so much, Will.
yeah, awesome. Thanks, Casey. Kap kun kap.